urban planning tries to figure out what the community wants and how to get there through strategic investments, through controls, and particularly in East Cambridge, we were able to get federal help to build Leechmere Canal Park and roadways and to create an environment where we could see healthy uses coming into what was a kind of tough economy. Think back, those of you who've been here a really long time, and remember that when Bob Healy took over as city manager, we had junk bond ratings, we had high unemployment, we had acres and acres of rusting industrial wasteland. And look at where we are now. And especially when I do a story like this for young people in schools, are you sure? Because you look around, you think it must have always been an incredible mecca like this, but it really wasn't so. And part of the story that we've shared together is trying to take this very special place and build on what's strong about it, struggle with issues. I'm not going to say everything has been hunky-dory. We've had our problems like any family. But find me another 6 1/4 square mile city that has 100,000 residents, that swells to 150,000 people during the day, where we have one of the largest percentages of subsidized housing in the country, and right down the street, a house will sell for $10 million. It's just an amazing place, and it's such a laboratory for trying to work out so many of the things that we care about in our culture. And people talk about what a notoriously difficult place it is to develop. And yeah, we have our fights, and I'll tell you about some of the fights. But we've developed about 1 million square feet of development every year for the last 20 years. So how hard can it be, really, folks? And really, we want to be reasoning together. I mean, there have been times when we've wasted energy, in my view, on stresses that didn't need to be there. At the same time, we have to work things out for sure. But we certainly have everyone in this room has a role. We look to the City Council for guidance. We have a strong team here in the administration and the best citizens in the world. So let us urban design together. I mean, some of my classmates from the GSD are here, and remember how much time we spent saying, what is urban design? We got to know what urban design is. Remember? And, you know, it's really different things to different people, but to me and the way we've worked in our city, it's been about being a verb, or several verbs, and the key ones that I was thinking of are that we really want to envision, we want to think about where we want to go. We need to negotiate with each other because no one can do it alone. I mean, I've done nothing alone. It's all been as a team, and you know, a lot of you are on my team or we're on the same playing field. And then, using the word in the broadest sense, we want to connect. We want to connect people to people, places to places. We want visual connections. Because when everything's connected, it's so much stronger. A really interesting question is whether urban planning is random or not. And I think the great thing about a city is it's a whole bunch of things working together so that you have a viable, interesting, lively kind of atmosphere in an urban place. And some historical examples, urban planning was very rigid. And in early New England, there were actually towns drawn up completely the way they were then built, or places like Savannah and Charleston in the South. Cambridge is really wonderful because it's not so rigid, and it maybe has a random feeling because it's so complicated, and it's partly that Cambridge grew up as a series of villages. Harvard Square was the earliest settlement by the Europeans coming here. Then East Cambridge was a completely separate village in the early 1800s, and little by little everything grew together, partly because of the growth of the trains and major roads that connected these villages, and then everything filled up in between.
Mass Ave is like our major corridor, but it's very irregular. It's not just a straight shot like in a totally planned city. So there's a certain randomness that comes perhaps from the stitching together of the urban fabric over 3.5 centuries.
As the city has taken the old 1960s zoning and little by little over many, many years gotten better and better about creating vision, having guidelines, having processes to guide development, we've come away from the old zoning, which had no height limits in the high-density districts. It didn't allow housing in a lot of the higher-density commercial industrial areas. There was no design review process, no parking maximum, and no housing allowed in a lot of the districts. So that was definitely a lack of vision, and reflected a worry in the 60s about the Rust Belt economy we had, and said, let everything go. Let's get a developer in and let stuff happen. And that's not a good way to do it. You really want to have a vision. And so the very first special permit was for this difficult site right here along the Broad Canal. This is Kendall Square in here, First Street over here. Tough site. And this is a time when we were trying to create a district in the East Cambridge riverfront that related to the historical pattern with historic red brick and punched windows and so forth. And the architect wanted this building to have black metal panels. And so we negotiated out a very modern building, but instead of black metal panels, it had this warmer red quality. And the other thing that we insisted on was a walkway along the Broad Canal here. And the developer thought we were crazy. Why would you want a walkway there on this miserable little canal? And you'll see, as many of you know already, that that was a good thing, a good idea that took a while to come around all the way. So the East Cambridge riverfront is an area that is over near the Lechmere T Station, First Street, over to the river, and it's about 60 acres. And we had a plan that envisioned a new mixed-use district. The really important thing about the East Cambridge riverfront was that we were showing for the first time that Cambridge could be a place where you could do significant development in a coherent way, because there was a lot of skepticism about that. And we were very anxious to have a mix of uses. When we started off, there was a strong office market and very little housing being built. We knew how important it was to have housing. We finally did get that, although no affordable component at this time. And we had this interconnected series of open spaces that really was going to enable us to take this wasteland and turn it into something that had the connections based on a vision for this mix of uses, and then we connect well to the river and to the neighbors. So this is a pretty amazing site when you think about it. And the Sonesta Hotel wanted a loan to expand, and the bank said, "Are you crazy? We're not giving you a loan because this is too risky." So it took the city's lead in creating the Lechmere Canal over the course of several phases, and we were hanging out there. This is a 10-acre site where the Cambridge Site Galleria eventually developed, and I think many of us thought, 10 acres, that's going to be the big thing, it will drive a lot of the other development. Turns out it was the last thing that happened. But we were able to get going with the open space component, and then by 1986, we had seen that the Sonesta was able to expand. We started getting office development, still no housing. And part of the lesson of the East Cambridge riverfront is how cyclical the real estate economy is. That there will be down times for office, and then housing will come back later, and then retail will come. So we were able to ride through the cycles in a very fortunate way, get the office space started here, and then we started getting housing with the Graves Landing project here. And again, see here this big piece is still missing. Well, it turned out that that was not such a bad thing, and that many of the people in this room here were involved in looking at the design of the Cambridge Site Galleria, and there's a whole book written about the design review process on that. It took a long time, and it finally happened in 1991 that the last big piece was the last one to go into place. And that was just when the economy took a downturn, so I'm not sure Steve Karp would have made that investment at that time, but the thing is you have to make decisions and stick with it. So we're fortunate that it opened in 1991 and has done well ever since. So just remember what it was like, because it's so easy to forget that we've come such a long way. During that negotiation that we had about the size and height and so forth of the Galleria, the idea came up for maybe putting housing on top of the Galleria. And at the time that seemed too risky. Now in the environment we're talking about now, maybe we would have done that. I don't think we can go back and put it on there now, but just to say that there was quite a bit of give and take on that project. Similarly, on the Esplanade housing project that Moji Sakti designed on the riverfront, we take our zoning seriously, and the developer wanted to build twice the height, twice the density. And we said, no, it's 120 feet. And Moji, who we all respect tremendously, wanted this to be kind of like another habitat, and Billy did it Expo in Montreal, all concrete. And we pushed again on making it brick, and you can literally see sort of a compromise here of brick and concrete coming together. But the key thing is that we got housing here on the riverfront, so important. There was a bonus for housing that was 25% more than office, and they'd actually designed an office building, and so because of the cyclical nature I was talking about, housing happened here, very important to making this part of the riverfront viable and energetic. And the Leechmere Canal Park itself and the other parks that go along with it are sort of a hallmark of all the urban design efforts we've undertaken for these large-scale industrial areas, where we needed to carve out a place for all the other uses to relate to.
There is a question of how one evolves from what we could call a Rust Belt economy to a high-tech economy, and trying to know which things might come first and what one wants to guide or incent or control. And in Cambridge, we had hundreds of acres of vacant land, basically vacant or underutilized land in the 50s, in the post-World War II era. And trying to figure out what should come first, I think it was important for the city to have a vision for what it wanted to become. Now, that's not to say that in 1960 or 1970 we can know where we're going to wind up in 2000, but we know certain things we don't want and know certain things we want to cling to or encourage. And a strength of Cambridge is its diversity on every level, social, physical, historical, and in terms of the economy, trying to have diversity. So in the 50s, we were searching for any kind of development. We were really pretty desperate in a way, like many New England cities. Look at Detroit now today. They're still trying to find their way out of the changing economy and not being able to change it in ways they wanted. We've been fortunate enough, because we are such a dense city with the history, with, of course, Harvard and MIT, connections across the river to the strengths of Boston. We're in a more fortunate position than a lot of cities. So we were able to say that we want to have a mix of uses, because Cambridge is inherently mixed use. You have all kinds of uses just down the street from each other, and that's worked well here. So we were definitely looking for a mix of uses as we started evolving the city in the last 35 years, and trying to make sure that we had a healthy mix of uses, including always residential.
So Cambridgeport came along as we were wrapping up East Cambridge, but the history goes back further, where we had 10 years, my first 10 years, we had 10 failed zoning petitions trying to figure out what should happen here. And sort of the big idea in Cambridgeport is that we went from a blue-collar economy to the kind of high-tech, mixed-use economy that we're more used to now. And it wasn't as obvious back in 1979 when we started having these zoning discussions that blue-collar was gone in Cambridge, and of course it's gone in most of America, or a lot of America. Whether that's something we could have prevented, I don't know, but certainly not in Cambridge. And in this case, because again, it took a while to get this project all worked out. We saw East Cambridge Riverfront developing, and we were proving that Cambridge is a place where you could do development. We were able to negotiate for the first time a requirement that the private developers provide affordable component to their housing, and that was really critical. It became a model for how we now have a percentage requirement for affordability in all our housing. And again, we really wanted to have a strong open space connection that would help organize the project. So there's a central park here, there's a passageway back here to the established neighborhood. You see the scale of the established neighborhood stepping up in heights to about a 70-foot height here, and allowing higher heights closer to the MIT campus. So there's a physical design aspect to it. There's a way of thinking about mixing uses here. And really, in terms of the design, we had a different approach here. I was just trying to tell you how important special permits are. Well, here we decided not to do special permits. It was partly because special permits are challengeable in court. And we had so much stress in this whole system here that it was decided to have a master plan pretty much embedded in the zoning that would predict how everything happened. And that worked quite well. It meant that every project would still come to the planning board for reviews, but they weren't each an individual special permit. And this was a pretty specific set of design guidelines. Here's the idea for how that central park should look with buildings around it. Drawing was done well before the development happened. And here you see it actually happened very much like that drawing. This turned out to be housing. Went back and forth on a lot of these sites as to which one would be housing, which one would be research and development. This is research and development. We have a hotel across the street. And again, it's 100,000 square feet of open space that was required in this area. And it was really the essential way to tie together this very strong mix of uses. We looked at guidelines for articulating the architecture. Again, we had brick in mind quite a bit, but not as much in the East Cambridge Riverfront. We've evolved in some of the thinking about the aesthetics of the buildings. The housing plan, again, has been really critical and has been in our discussions even recently, trying to make sure that the affordability is maintained as we go into the future here. And you see the scale of housing moving from the neighborhood towards the highest density, far off towards MIT, trying to create hospitable places along the way. Some of the buildings wound up being a nice contrast with the brick. This is a beautiful copper-clad glass and rock building. And so, again, important to kind of think back again to what a wasteland we had. This is the Pat's Toe area. If you ever had the storage you had car towed in the 80s, well, that's, you probably know Pat's Toe. And so we were seeing all this development happening, call it north of Pacific. This is Pacific Street here. So as this area developed, it became clear that the area south of Pacific, and here's Pacific, needed some attention, and we had a set of guidelines for thinking about the evolution of that light or lower scale industrial area to a mix of housing and lofts. And that's really happened quite a bit over the last couple of decades. That we're seeing a lot of really elegant loft housing next to some of the old time industrial uses that still are there. A third component of the University Park project that was really important was an agreement for traffic mitigation. People were very, very concerned about how all this new development was going to affect their ability to get home and drive on the streets. A lot of agonizing about traffic. And this was, again, I would say, a model for what we do now is on every project. We require traffic mitigation, all sorts of measures to keep people out of their single occupant vehicle, get them into mass transit, take bikes, walk. And again, it's easy to look back now and say, sure, that made sense, but it was a major step forward to make that happen. And in terms of infrastructure, we worked out a cost-sharing agreement among the city, MIT, and Forest City for taking this wasteland. When I was was a student at Harvard, I took courses at MIT, and I remember walking along this in the rain. What a horrible walk this was. From Central Square down this way towards MIT, that's Main Street. There was a gas station here. And in our 1983 plan, we had a little green triangle, so that should be a park. It took 25 years, and we had a committee. Don't we always have committees? And we voted on this, and we went through the alphabet to scheme T on this one, I think, for taking Main Street and creating a plaza here and making that a much more hospitable place for people to circulate from Central Square towards MIT. And it's become a great success and something for us to think about as we look to more development happening in this part of the city.
Cambridge is famous for being alive with activism. Someone used that phrase years ago. And it's really a challenging thing when you're trying to set a course and have some predictability, some structure in urban planning. But it's also extremely important to having the process come out right. And democracy is what it's called. I mean, Cambridge is really lucky to have such a democratic process, even though sometimes as a public official it's been very difficult because people get hot under the collar and they're very passionate about it and people have different points of view. One has to believe in the process of negotiation in a public forum, of trying to come to commonality about where the city should grow. And in Cambridge, we have layers of that kind of discussion, starting with the city council, who sets the goals for the city, then going through what we've done in the community planning department for years, going out to the community, trying to get their feedback on how areas should change. Then as the plans get more firmed up and proponents are looking to get permits to actually build buildings that fit within that plan, there's another layer of discussion. So I think all of those layers of discussion are extremely important to coming up with a good outcome.
Now, let's shift back to North Point. And that's the area furthest off to the north of Somerville. It's up this way, there's the river. This is the East Cambridge riverfront here. And a lot of us didn't even know this was Cambridge. This whole area. And it's 60 acres. This is about 60 acres. And we were shocked to find it was Cambridge and that we ought to be doing something about it. This area along here is referred to as the lost half mile because it was really a no person's land. There was Federal Distillers Warehouse, no reason for anybody to want to go in here, but there's the harbor down there. And so reclaiming the lost mile is probably the big idea here in North Point. It has many, many components to it, but taking a part of the city that was totally underutilized and trying to work it into something that was a positive part of the city was a big undertaking. And we negotiated to get the Zakeen Bridge in place of just a highway bridge as we saw Scheme Z, and a lot of you know what Scheme Z is. It's when the Central Artery got depressed in Boston, it all came up in a big bunch of ramps in Cambridge. So as we were fighting that fight with the state about Scheme Z, we started getting some pioneers moving in here. And we have the Museum Towers residential, the ground floor retail, and EF, very importantly, brought a lot of young people and energy to this area. And they were very patient waiting for the parks that they knew were coming. And thank goodness they did come. And this is the beautiful North Point Park that was worked out with the New Charles River Basin Committee and the DCR, and took quite a while. This is mitigation for the Central Artery, as this is a Zakeen Bridge. Now just imagine, there's no reason that couldn't have been just your average ugly highway bridge, because it's a very short span. But we had this wonderful committee, many of you in this room are involved in that said, let's make a landmark here. You know, what a brilliant thing, because now you know where the Charles River meets the harbor, and it's a visually stunning anchor for North Point and really for the region. So we had our pioneers here, the EF original building and the Museum Towers building built. We were working out the park here, the recreation, and the Zakeen Bridge, and we realized we needed better zoning for the area. We refer to this as Gilmore Bridge and Senior Bryan Highway. So we had the idea that there should be a central park, because that's, again, a hallmark of all these areas that we're redeveloping. And then we had a really good development team who came in and said, well, rather than having your park go this way, let's make it go this way. This is Leachmere Station, this is Cambridge Sac Galleria, the East Cambridge neighborhood. So by extending the park this way, we're able to get a better connection under the bridge over towards the park. So another part of the message here is it's good to have essentials in your plan that you really stick with, but it's also good to have some flexibility so you can get better ideas, because none of us have the wonderful idea all fixed from the very start, and it's good to learn from our experiences. So here's an image of that park extending down to the iconic bridge, and this is an image of how a mix of uses is going to be forming around this the park. So then we had another iteration. Basically, a lot of the plan was fixed with the central park, but the new developer wanted more height in exchange for making these parks bigger. And the first building is now under construction, and it does a lot of really good things. It's here along the Gilmore Bridge. This is Museum Towers, EF Building, Leachmere Canal, Cambridge Sac Galleria. And there's the open space that's now starting to mature and look pretty nice out there. So this tower is in a critical spot that helps us realize how close the orange line and green line stations are. And certainly for a lot of us, our mental map, we don't think about the orange line so much when we're over it, but they're pretty much equidistant to this tower. And there's going to be a beautiful walkway coming down from the bridge into this space here. So this is under construction. It's going to make a nice connection both to Fort Cambridge and for the other communities around. So EF managed to stick it out. They're doing well. We have the park here, and they're building their second building. And this building is at a critical juncture where a magnificent bridge has been built that connects this park now through the weave of bridges over here towards the Zakeen Bridge. And here's an incredible view at night. This is not simulation. This is really this amazing way to get from Cambridge over to Charlestown and eventually onto the harbor. So an important part of a vision that said make this a livable place for people and have connections of all kinds that make that workable. And during the daytime to see people coming back and forth from the communities is just so rewarding after so much work that the committee continues to do on trying to humanize this whole area. To recapitulate a little bit, here's the Zakeen Bridge, the park is down here, the new EF building is happening in here. And so this green shaded area is where we're going to be seeing more development. So as time goes along, the planning board will be seeing more of these projects, and East Cambridge neighbors watch over very closely. We have another housing project going ahead on the 22 Water Street side here. So we're starting to get a strong component of housing in Northland.
Urban design is a great discipline because it combines the planning thinking that looks at where is it we want to go in even socioeconomic terms with the architect's view of what should it feel like spatially. So these things need to work together, I think, to get the best outcome. That is to say, we both know programmatically and use, in terms of use, what it is we're trying to achieve in the community, but we're also thinking about physically how it's going to look and feel and fit with other things. Again, it's an iterative process where you go at the broadest level of thinking and you get more and more specific as you get into the details. And you could think of that in the very recent Kendall Square work we've been doing, where there have been issues about how much more biotech are we going to have in Kendall Square, how much residential can we get in, how do we get the ground floor uses. Those are more planners' questions about what kinds of uses, where on the design side, we have to think, how much can we actually fit in here physically before it gets to be uncomfortable? There have been really different points of view about how tall the buildings should be. We need to look at the height of those buildings and think about what views are being blocked or where shadows are being cast, what kind of wind patterns are going on. And so you see it's kind of a mixing of the planning principles and the program, if you will, along with the design, and trying to make those things evolve together so that you get a good outcome.
To shift gears a little bit, let's think back to the red line extension. And it used to be that the red line terminated in Harvard Square. And we didn't even have those stations in Porter, Davis, and Elwood. So it was an important time in my early years here to start working with the station designers and think about how the stations could benefit their squares and their neighborhoods, and come up with some amazing things like the Danahee Park, which is right out here. This is a city dump site. Most of you probably know the story, but for those of you who don't, it's just incredible that all the excavate from digging the tunnel from Harvard Square beyond was piled up on this dump site, and we have an incredible park out here that was made as a result. Alewife is one of our toughest areas because it was so fragmented in terms of ownership. Here's where the new station is. This is Wrench Towers, the shopping areas, the incredible Fresh Pond Reservation. It has been very difficult to deal with this area because traffic really is a problem here. I mean, every time we talk about a development project in Cambridge, traffic. Well, this is really, it's like suburban traffic. That's where they have traffic problems, it's suburbs. And so we started building housing out here. And the good thing about housing is it doesn't have the peak hour characteristics that going to work in the morning, going home in the evening very regularly that clog up the streets. But of course there is traffic, and we have to see where we come out with all that new development that's starting to happen out here, mostly in housing, because we have such a strong housing market right now. Clearly, Porter Square benefited from having the T station, the renovation of the old Sears building, and Leslie University growing here. The church has been moved. There's going to be an incredible addition there. And so the T station has had an impact on that part of the city. Spend a little more time talking about Harvard Square, but it's such a complicated story. Charlie Sullivan's here, and he could go on forever about this. And I'm going to try to get through the idea that really in particularly the 80s and 90s, did a lot of evolving of some of the open spaces in Harvard Square that needed help. And there were some 50 projects going through the Harvard Square Advisory Committee. And we were trying to think about the different parts of the square, not just thinking about it all as a square, but this is a little drawing from the guidelines, talk about the square itself, Golden Arrow Streets area, the Gold Coast along Mount Auburn Street, JFK Street, and historic Memorial Square, Gravel Square, Church Street. It's all different areas, and they shared the characteristics of being a part of this square that we all love so much, but they all had different challenges, and certainly the MBTA project really made a huge impact on the heart of the square. This is the MBTA station before the Red Line was extended. It was an island that had this beloved little historic structure which was saved and turned into a newsstand. And in the renovations, this became a peninsula instead of an island. So now we have just gone through making the crosswalks even better, and I think there's a lot working here well that makes it feel like a pedestrian precinct, even though we have things like the pit here. And a lot of people really, really hate the pit. But I've talked to some parents who don't mind the fact they can go and see their punk kid there in the pit, you know, they're 17. They're having some big problems there too, and don't need to make light of it completely, but it is sort of a forum, and we need gritty places, and even in Harvard Square, it's probably a good thing to have places for kids to hang out. So before the Red Line was extended, and when Harvard Square was in the line, the trains had to go underground from the heart of the square and come out onto what's called the car barn site. Called car barns because the trains would come out here to be maintained and cleaned. And when some of us were students at the GSD and we would go walk to Harvard Square, we often would stop because, yes, Boylston Street went on down here, now JFK Street, but this was a hostile barrier. There was a wall all around it. And again, it wasn't that long ago. To think about this change is pretty astounding. And to see here the contrast between this walled-off precinct and what we have now with the JFK Memorial Park, the JFK School of Government, the Charles Square mixed-use project, and the passageway through here to the parkland along the river really is rewarding that, again, we've taken a place that was pretty tough and inaccessible and made it a strong part of the walking environment in the city. And this is PUD special permit number 2, so I think that was about when Les came on. So that was an important step forward in looking at evolving industrial areas and dealing with changes that were associated with the tea work. Another couple of fascinating tea projects are the One Brattle Square project up here on Brattle Street. This building is built on top of the bus routes that go down into the station, and that's a very expensive proposition, and only would happen in a place like Harvard Square, which, for better or worse, has gotten more and more popular, and it's actually gotten more expensive. One of our challenges is affordability as a city. But certainly it's nice to take some of these tough areas and transform them. And last week we had the groundbreaking for this incredible little project here where the conductor's building, which is only about 25 feet wide and 200 feet long, is getting saved and renovated. And a new building is being built over here where Chili's used to be. It's built over the transformer. The red line transformer for the entire red line is going to be under this part of this building, which seems kind of crazy, but it's actually going to help make this portion of the square much more hospitable to move around with, for retail, active uses, eyes on the street. Quincy Square was another one of our famous processes that was really quite an amazing one, where we had a committee that worked for quite a while to try to figure out what should happen here. Now again, when we were students at the GSD, we would walk down Quincy Street and you were faced with asphalt, stripes, a little painted island, buses coming, no crosswalks, an unbelievably hostile environment to be right on the edge of Harvard Square. Through the committee process, and I'm summarizing something in about 2 minutes here that took many years. It was quite contentious, believe it or not. This was an extremely difficult process. We wound up with, I think, a magnificent solution that created an urban plaza that had crosswalks. It's safe to move here, and it ties together Harvard Square, Harvard University, the neighborhoods beyond. And this is a view from Quincy Square that I particularly love because here's this wonderful historic building on the corner, the church. This is a new building. It's kind of faux historic. This is a renovation here with a pretty modern top here. But it all kind of hangs together nicely, I think, and has that sort of wonderful smorgasbord that characterizes a lot of Harvard Square. It's not some pristine historic district. It's not like Back Bay, which has so many rules and regularity as how it's developed. It's always been slightly funky. Charlie told us that this park was a really important park. And before I knew that, when I was a student at GSD, we studied this park. No one ever went in here. Why? Because it had a circular path that went nowhere. It had a privet hedge and a chain link fence. But it's one of the earliest markets in America. And so through one of our big processes, we wound up reconnecting the corners. Charlie told us that was the historic way people walk. And sure enough, while this was under construction, there were bulldozers out there, people were walking on the desire lines. All the designers here know what desire lines are. For regular folks, that's just where you want to go. And people wanted to go from there to there. And so I'm very pleased that this project has worked out so well.
One of the most wonderful aspects of Cambridge as a place to live is that we have very strong neighborhoods, and they are all extremely idiosyncratic, different, complementary, and yet everybody in those neighborhoods feels a part of the city at the same time. So clearly, as we've developed areas like the University Park project over right next to the Cambridgeport neighborhood, the character of that neighborhood has been in everybody's minds throughout this whole process. And the neighbors come out and they talk about what they want to see in the development areas, and the developers have to listen to what they're talking about and try to be responsive so that the new development doesn't overwhelm the neighborhood character. And I think about, for example, along Brookline Street, where thank goodness the Interbelt did not go. That was where there was supposed to be a huge highway that would have been a disaster for that community and the city as a whole. Instead, we have Brookline Street, which when I started out had a decidedly Rust Belt, lower scale industrial character, and little by little it's evolved into a residential edge that in my view has helped make the transition from the traditional Cambridgeport neighborhood over to University Park, and was kind of intentionally stepped up the development away from the neighborhood to try to protect that Brookline Street edge and make it a better and better place for the neighborhood. So in every area that we've developed, neighborhood character is always on the table as something people want to protect and think about and try to enhance, if anything.
Moving into the home stretch here, we're getting to Central Square and Kendall Square. Lots of you have been involved in those discussions over the last, how many years? 3 years? How many years has it been? We've been talking about this for good 3 years. Many of you know, and many of you participated in the committees that we had to work on Central and Kendall Squares. And we had some very complex goals, envisioning each square as unique, negotiating amount and types of growth, and connecting each to the other, connecting the river as best as we could, but really trying to maintain the characters of each of those areas. And this is a story that's not complete yet. We've been through a lot of the rezoning thinking, but not all of the pieces are in place yet, so stay tuned on this one. Backing up a little bit, one of my favorite projects was the Central Square Improvements Project, where we took what was a highway, literally a barrier to both sides of Central Square. Again, see the pedestrians out here in the middle of the street, clueless as to where they should go. And this was a 70-foot wide crossing. I mean, 70 feet is really long. Normal crossings maybe 45 feet or so. And we took a lane of traffic out and added 4 or 5 feet to each side of the street. Having, again, the clear crosswalks, lighting that really works with the square. And as a result, we've seen the growth of outdoor dining in Central Square. And it's just a wonderful thing that what had been kind of tough, unfriendly streets are now very often populated, especially not in weather like today, of course, but even halfway decent weather. People want to be out there and have appropriated the street for people instead of for cars. And again, I had mentioned the Lafayette Square project down at the end of Central Square towards MIT. MIT's down that way. And so this is an important area where there's a lot of testing now as to how much Central Square should stop here, how much Kendall Square should come down here. Going even further down Massachusetts Avenue towards MIT, Central Square is down this way. I am so grateful to Novartis for parachuting out of the sky and taking on the Necco Candy Factory. Does everybody know that Novartis, a high-tech, wonderful company, is in the candy factory? And when they renovated this building, they had to scrape off all the sugar because they couldn't deal with sugar in their experiments. So they were treating it like hazardous waste, getting that sugar out. And not only do we have the benefit of them being there, but this almost became a telecom hotel. Telecom hotel is jargon for a building that has switchgear for the internet. It would have been totally dead, a total waste. So instead of that dead thing being there, we had Novartis has flourished and built a second building, and they're now building another amazing building across the street. They picked up on the having a European bent anyway. They picked up on the sidewalk cafe idea, a wonderful flower cafe, and they're planning to keep that on sidewalk dining scene in the building across the street. This is Maya Lynn's metaphor for a New England stone wall that floats. I don't know, that's Maya's idea. It's going to be fun to look at. And that stone should be coming up, I think, before Tuesday. So we also had one more project down this way that's recently gone through the whole review process, and that's this block in here. Here's University Park, there's the NECO building. So this little section here is now permitted to have a biotech building. We worry about biotech coming too close into Central Square, but this is still down in what's the emerging biotech area. And a lot of discussion with the planning board and with neighbors about how to have a building that is clearly biotech, because every one of these we have to deal with lots of mechanical equipment on the roof. But we also wanted it to feel like Central Square and having strong ground floor retail. And importantly, taking Blanche Street and making it, this is where the Star Market's down into the street here, making it easier to get down there and turning that into a place that people can easily circulate. So that's going to be under construction soon. Now we get to Kendall Square. My gosh, again, another one of these unbelievable changes. This was a view in around 1969 or 70 when we had built a lot of these big, unfriendly buildings, the Draper Labs building, the original Tech Square project, the building for USDOT here, where the Boothe Center is. We used to call this a Badger building. That's where the Innovation Center is now, the courthouse, which is a sore point over here. This area was cleared for urban renewal, and here's what's happened over many years. Now, obviously, we could spend hours talking about that. We don't have that much time to do it, but it's been an extremely rewarding process of seeing an increasing intensification of development and trying to get some mix of uses in here. And the redevelopment authority was responsible for the area that's sort of in beige here. And their urban renewal plan really dated back from another era of planning, where the notion was not so much about the street, the sidewalk that we now care so much about, but more about creating tax base, having office buildings, and defensible space where you could hide riffraff or coming and so forth. And that's evolved over time, and we've recently had a refreshing of the Urban Renewal Board, some of them are here tonight, and they're really looking at trying to finally bring in the housing that we've wanted here all along. And that's going to be an amazing process. It'll be a housing tower here on Ames Street. This is where Legal Seafoods is. Ames Street is pretty grim right now. There's a parking garage, loading docks, and it's right across the street from the new road expansion, which has ground floor retail. It's starting to make this an urban street. So getting housing in here will be pretty amazing. It's going to be a 250-foot high tower. It'll be pretty urban. This is one of probably the most urban centers that we have in the city. But housing is so important, having a mix of incomes that we insist on now in all our housing projects, and turning this into a really incredible street that's going to be fun to see. So there was a period where Kendall Square was almost a pejorative term. There was a big city across the river, and the mayor said, I want me a biotech center, but I don't want it to be like Kendall Square. And that mayor now is probably eating his words. Of course, he's retired. Because Kendall Square has come into its own now in the last decade. It used to be pretty boring. It would shut down after hours. There was no place to have a good meal. And it's just taken off, and it's amazing to see the transformation. So for a while, this developer said, okay, we'll call our development Kendall Square. It's actually not in Kendall Square. This is Broad Canal. This is a Badger Building Innovation Center. It's 3rd Street, kind of tucked over here. 10 acres, just like the Cambridge Site Gallery, if you remember, that's a 10-acre site. This is a 10-acre site. And they did a great job of breaking this up into a series of blocks. They brought in housing here and really finally started knitting this old industrial power plant into the city fabric. They brought in a Genzyme building, which is a LEED Platinum, which means it's really high green standards, so it's a very glassy building, and glassy buildings are controversial now as to whether that's really what we should be doing, but it's a beautiful building, it has this incredible atrium inside. And housing. They brought housing to this site in the Watermark Tower, phase 1 here. Another developer across the street, this is on 3rd Street, responded with more housing, so we've got 1,000 units or so now where we had none, and that's made a huge difference because people live here, they consider this to be their neighborhood, they're out and about. And this is a rendering of the second phase of that Watermark housing tower, showing it coming down to the Broad Canal. Remember PUD number 1? Special permit number 1 right here? There's the walkway, and now we've got the walkway on the other side. The neighbors have been incredibly involved in making this happen, and it's just very rewarding to see Broad Canal coming into its own. And recently in this K2 process, MIT has gone through its own incredibly involved process. It has come out with rezoning that allows an additional 1 million square feet of development in Kendall Square. They're still doing more thinking about how to connect through the campus, how to make better connections to the river. But a major step forward where MIT is seeing themselves as a part of the Kendall Square community, and we're getting a whole new energy in Kendall Square with the Kendall Square Association that didn't used to exist before, and turning Kendall into an ever more vibrant part of the city. So Broad Canal Walk is going from 3rd Street. This is the Innovation Center building here, looking down Broad Canal here. Their hope is to wrap that building with ground floor retail and housing. So if we're looking at where the canoes are here, down into Kendall Square, there's the Boothe Center. This will be another amazing street, which used to be just a total unpleasant street, and will become something quite vibrant. So moving further up towards the neighborhood, an amazing process has happened here with the developer, the neighbors, the city council, now coming into the planning board realm of taking Binney Street and trying to make biotech happen here, along with an amazing open space strategy for the park near the neighborhood and the park down at the end of 1st Street and Edwin Lane Boulevard. This is Campsite Gallery is up here, the river here, Broad Canal. So this area is already starting to see a lot of change happening. And this is a visualization of buildings going along Binney Street with this very strategically placed 2-acre park that helps mediate the wonderful East Cambridge neighborhood feeling with this bigger scale feeling along Binney Street. And also the park down here next to the Riverport and Esplanade, a very important part of giving addresses and humanizing this whole area.
Planning forward is a very dicey proposition because nobody knows exactly how the economy is going to work. If you look back 20 years ago, I don't think the word biotech existed, and we certainly weren't thinking about biotech coming until one of the early movements in the city was to have Biogen move into Kendall Square, and that was one of the very first significant biotech movements. So it's hard to know exactly how the economy is going to go, and there's this incredible evolution from when I first started, and the Sonesta Hotel couldn't even get a loan to expand the hotel because investors thought Cambridge was a bad investment, to now where we have Microsoft and Google parachuting in because they've heard this is a good place to be. So it's a tremendous evolution, and what's going to happen from here on, it's hard to say. I mean, biotech has obviously taken a big role now, and we all know that biotech is a challenging kind of business model because they don't know whether they're going to get that drug out 5 years or 10 years from now, and they have to convince investors, and we're relying on that a lot right now. In the old days, turn of the century, MIT was helping the food industry. And this was when food was a big item at MIT, trying to think about how to have safe, preserved foods and so forth. That's totally gone now, and the candy factories are almost gone. But we're looking at biotech and thinking, well, this is really great because they want beautiful environments. They're good corporate citizens, but what's their future going to be like? So I'm hoping that we are continuing to diversify in the economic sector as much as possible so that we can withstand some of the ebbs and flows. But frankly, there's only so much a city planner or an urban designer can do about that. It's partly up to the economy. And I think the good thing by now is Cambridge is just such a wonderful city that people want to be here for a lot of reasons. And the more reasons people want to be here, the better equipped we are to deal with the evolution of the economy.
And I hope you will continue to envision, negotiate, and connect, because it takes a lot of time. It takes a village to do it, and it takes us all quite a while to figure out exactly what should be happening. But I believe we can continue to envision a Cambridge that maintains its livability. I mean, what a livable, wonderful place we have here. We're just so happy to have worked here and be a resident here. And I think we all need to continue to negotiate and with respect for different points of view, because things come out better that way. I mean, I think what happens at the planning board is democracy in action. It's people coming in, maybe they're angry, but they express themselves, and if they can work that out, things come out better for it. And when I, again, use the word connect, I'm meaning it in all different ways. But the basic idea is that you want the whole to be greater than the sum of the parts, and that only comes about by having those kinds of connections. So I really appreciate your letting me be on your team, and I'm going to be watching. So.